Hello again. Welcome back. I'm Kirsten Murphy, Executive Director for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, and I'm here with the second installment of our 5-part video review of the work plans for the Council's performance years 1 and 2 in our next 5-year cycle, which begins October 1st and runs to September 30th of the year 2026. This section is going to be covering the goal area we call Goal Area 1, and it has 5 objectives, all of which have to do with supporting people to speak up for themselves and to advocate both for their own programs, but also at the systems level. So we will turn now to sharing the slides. For those of you that have the slide deck, we will be going through slides 10 to 23 in this section. And if you don't have the slides, don't worry about it, because we will also be sharing them on the screen while I review the various objectives and activities that we're planning. So we're going to start with objective 1 out of the 5 in this goal area, and that is leadership development. You'll remember that some of our objectives involve continuing work that we're already doing as a council. The objective reads that the Vermont DD Council will support self-advocates and family members to become leaders in the disability rights movement. And there are a couple of areas of activity that are going to support that objective. Remember, the activities, this left-hand section, is the core of the work plan. It's the things that we're going to do or hire other people to do. In fact, this is a good example of using both approaches. The first activity we're going to undertake is to continue to plan and host the leadership series each year. We hope that that will be in the spring of 2022 and 2023. We're, of course, not sure how COVID will impact the series, but we are hopeful that by next spring we'll be able to do in-person meetings. Our leadership series has already 160 or so graduates, a combination of self-advocates and family members. It's a 3-part weekend-long training. 3 weekends, and what we hear from people is that it's a great way to begin to connect to the disability rights movement and to connect one's own needs and that of their family member to the broader systems change that needs to happen so that people have the services and supports that let them live truly meaningful lives. So we're going to continue to hold that leadership series in collaboration with Family Network and Green Mountain Self-Advocates. We will also plan to offer a new offering, and that would be a summer summit for all of our graduates. Our graduates have repeatedly asked for an opportunity to get together. We did a little bit of a virtual series this summer. Didn't really quite feel like getting together, but we had to do it virtually. Our hope is, though, that in summer 2022 and 23, we will have a summit, one of which will be a celebration because it will be our 10th year as a series, although those years have not always been sequential, been some gaps in between, but we will have just graduated our 10th class, I believe. So that is one cluster of activities, and you will remember that an activity plus our resources results in an outcome, a change in the world. So the outcome we're looking for in the first 2 years is that at least 20 self-advocates and family members per year receive leadership training, strengthening the pool of Vermonters prepared to advocate for systems change. There's a second area of activity assigned to this objective, and that is also a couple things that we have done in the past. We will fund Green Mountain Self-Advocates as part of our statutory requirement, support self-advocacy. And in funding a grant to them, we provide them with some resources so that peers who are staff members of Green Mountain Self-Advocates and also self-advocates themselves will be teaching other self-advocates at the local self-advocacy group level to exercise more leadership skills, problem solve as a group so that they can work as a cohesive team at the local level, and also help people learn how to speak up when they're talking to, say, a legislator or an important decision maker, even like locally at their agency, for example. So we will be supporting GMSA to teach self-advocacy skills. We will also be supporting their Voices and Choices conference with a conference sponsorship. So those activities, again, along with our resources, will result in this outcome, which is that self-advocates teach and reinforce leadership skills through local groups on at least 20 occasions per year and at the statewide self-advocacy conference. You'll recall that along with those outcomes, there are some physical things, and this is probably not a complete list, but this is highlights of the things that the council will create by engaging in those activities. 40+ self-advocates and family members are trained in leadership, reaching a total of 200 graduates from the leadership training series. We will have a celebration of leadership, 10 years. There will be a new summer program for leadership graduates. We will have a data set collected for the administration for community living. What I mean by this is that we will be taking information about those 2 new leadership classes and setting a baseline about how much they have learned and how much they are anticipating and feeling ready to engage in more advocacy activities. We will go back later in our 5-year cycle to ask people, since you graduated from leadership a year, 2 years, even 3 years ago, have you in fact, has that increased your participation in advocacy and leadership roles? So every 5-year cycle with this important program, which we have sustained over the years, we go back and do what's called a deep dive in order to see if we're being impactful in the way that we expect to be. So we are hoping that by taking the leadership training series, people are going on to assume leadership roles and to participate in decision-making at the policy level. I can certainly tell you many great examples of that. I think most of our council members are leadership graduates, for example. But we are also required by the Administration for Community Living to demonstrate that in a more statistical way. So we will, one of the things we will have is the data to be able to do that. Another thing that we will create is 2 successful statewide self-advocacy conferences. That doesn't sound quite right. We don't create that by ourselves. We are one of many, many entities that helps make that happen. But that is still considered to be an output. But certainly we are a tiny player in the many resources that have to happen to make that very successful conference that GMSA holds every year. And then finally, there will be 20 sessions per year where self-advocates teach peers about speaking up, about leadership skills, and about the self-advocacy movement. So all of those are outputs that happen because our resources and our activities came together. We're going to move on to the second objective, which, following quite nicely from the first one, is self-advocacy, our self-advocacy goal. This reads, the DD Council will support the expansion and long-term sustainability of the self-advocacy movement in Vermont. I want to say a little bit about the word sustainability in this context, because it's an important problem that we're trying to solve. When we did our needs assessment, we were reminded that Green Mountain Self-Advocates, which is a very strong organization and nationally prominent in the self-advocacy movement, does have something they need to begin to plan for, which is that their administrative director is gradually approaching retirement. She's not retiring anytime soon, but it's important for a healthy organization to plan for that succession. And so in order for Green Mountain Self-Advocates to kind of face the future and not feel that there's going to be a big period of disruption, they need to start thinking about where they want to be longer term and how they're going to fill that particular role in the future. So not only are we wanting to support self-advocacy with this objective, but we're also wanting to help ensure that it's there in a just as strong way in the future. So we have two areas of activity. One has to do with expanding self-advocacy, getting even more communities involved in the self-advocacy movement. So GMSA will add at least 2 local areas that will support new self-advocacy groups. And it's going to provide ongoing technical assistance to all their established groups, which number over 20. But I think there are some communities out there, Bradford comes to mind, I think, where there seems to be a cluster of self-advocates who would be interested in forming their own group. So that is one area of new activity. Notice that distinction's a little subtle here, but the pink is different from the purple. So that's, remember, a new activity. And then we will also be doing some of the activities that we have done in the past. We're going to continue through our grant to GMSA to support board training. Remember, Green Mountain Self-Advocates has a board, the majority of which are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're going to support the board to make sure that it reviews its strategic plan each year. And then the board is going to, over time, write a sustainability plan. We hope that will happen in year 2, but we don't know for sure. Remember, work plans are our best guess and also ambitious. So these 2 areas of activity are going to result in a couple of outcomes. 1, Vermont's statewide self-advocacy organization adds 2 new groups, at least 2 new groups based on local interest. And 2, the self-advocacy movement in Vermont has a strong sustainability plan in place for when its administrative director retires. Now this slide actually continues to show a 3rd area of activity, and that has to do with diversity. So we're still talking about activities and outcomes. Green Mountain Self-Advocates, through the funding we provide them, will partner with agencies and transition programs to reach out and include self-advocates from diverse communities, by which we mean communities of color, people who are new Americans, groups that might identify with the LGBTQIA community, or other groups that are thought to be and often experience marginalization in our society. That's work that GMSA has been doing over the years, and we will continue to fund them to do that. And that will have the outcome the Vermont statewide self-advocacy organization reaches out to youth and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are BIPOC and/or New Americans, or another group. Another area of activity is that GMSA will teach local self-advocacy groups, direct support providers, and family caregivers how to include individuals with complex disabilities and/or substantial support needs to be part of the self-advocacy movement in Vermont. And this is an overlap with the objective that you'll see later down the line in our goal area 3, where we are working on specifically this underserved population, the folks with probably the most, who are experiencing the most impact from their disability. And the idea here is that GMSA has many, many very active members who have significant support needs, but they'll help teach some of the rest of us how to provide support for and fully involve that community of individuals with high support needs in self-advocacy and in, of course, the rest of the important activities that those individuals might want to engage in. So the outcome of that will be that more individuals with complex disabilities and/or substantial support needs participate in local self-advocacy groups. Finally, we're going to look at the outputs that are going to result from our activities in the self-advocacy area. The Council hopes to create at least 2 new local self-advocacy groups, 20 to 30 well-informed board members at GMSA, I should have read. It will hope to support an updated strategic plan for GMSA and a detailed sustainability plan for GMSA. Through our support, 10+ youth per year who are BIPOC and/or New Americans will have learned about self-advocacy. And we hope to see a 15% increase in GMSA's membership over 2 years. GMSA already has a substantial membership, more than 600 people. So I think if I'm doing the math correctly here, that would be 90. I think that's 90 more people. That would be, yes, 90 more members. So would be a 15% increase. Remember, I talked about trying to set realistic targets. So I hope that that's realistic. I know that there are at least that many people clamoring to get into Voices and Choices long after they've run out of room to have everyone be able to have a hotel room and attend that wonderful conference. All right, so that concludes Objective 1.2. We're going to move to Objective 1.3, an area where I'm just incredibly excited about the work the Council is doing, because this is an area where we have already begun work and recently received a technical assistance grant, and that's the area of guardianship. The objective reads, working with community partners, the Council will promote a range of alternatives to full guardianship, including supported decision-making. Supported decision-making, in case that's not a familiar term to you, is an approach where someone who needs some help making a decision, like all of us, I need help making decisions. This is just a little bit more structured way to do it. An individual with a disability might call upon a friend or a couple of friends or family member or neighbor or whoever they would like to come together when there's an important decision to be made and to assist the individual in thinking through the pros and cons of that decision. So supported decision-making is really just a formalized way of doing what all of us do when we have a tough decision to make. And it can often be used as an alternative to guardianship, which is in fact a very serious kind of arrangement where somebody is really giving up their civil rights through a court process and handing them over to somebody who presumably has their best interest in mind, but still, I think most of us want to be in charge of our own lives, and certainly people with disabilities are no different. So the activities here on the left-hand column are the building up of a community of practice. The community of practice will oversee strategies to increase the number of Vermonters with intellectual and developmental disabilities who access alternatives to full guardianship, including using the legislative process if necessary. It's something we're trying to figure out right now. Do we need legislation in order to promote supported decision-making, or are there other less difficult routes we can take to get the same amount of recognition for supported decision-making and other alternatives? This community of practice is really a group that involves the Council, Green Mountain Self-Advocates, the Office of Public Guardian, the Disability Law Project at Vermont Legal Aid, quite prominently as part of this group. The transition coordinator for the Agency of Education is involved, and I'm going to feel terrible if I leave someone out. Family Network, Vermont Family Network is also involved in this group. And we've been meeting monthly for quite a while now as a way to learn about and discuss how we can promote alternatives to guardianship. So this community of practice is going to develop a plan for sustaining the output or the substance of this grant we received. So let me back up and explain a little bit. The council received a very nice technical assistance grant. The money originally came from the administration for community living, the same folks in the federal government that fund us. And that grant supported us to identify 4 youth ambassadors here in Vermont and have them participate in a training program. And they've been doing that this summer. And these trained youth ambassadors are people who've recently graduated from high school but aren't older than 26. And they're being trained to talk to their peers who are transition age youth about guardianship issues and to answer their questions and to share the message that guardianship isn't needed for everything. It's not necessarily going to do what you think it's going to do. It's a very serious signing away of your rights. And at the same time, there are better ways to get support in making the decisions about your life. So we have these 4 youth ambassadors. They've been doing a great job and will continue to do more work throughout this year, which is the year of the grant that we have. And I'm saying above here as an activity, this community of practice is going to figure out a way for sustaining the youth ambassadors after year 1. So after this grant goes away, we're going to think about, was this a successful program? And if so, how would we like to make it happen in year 2? So the youth ambassadors, as I said, this area of activity has to do with making sure that they're trained. We would also like to ask them to create some materials promoting their work. So a video, and possibly a story portrait, which is it's a nice 1-page communication tool that we use, where we feature an individual or possibly a program with a strong picture, and then a very short write-up about that individual's issue or that group's issue that they're working on. We create them into very attractive looking portraits. And you'll hear later on in the work plan what we hope to do with those story portraits. A third area of activity has to do with parent training, because as important as it is to train self-advocates about alternatives, it's also important that their family members receive information about what guardianship is and isn't, what it can and can't do to help an individual, and how alternatives might in fact meet the needs that parents often have for ensuring that their individual that they love is making wise and well thought out decisions. So a component of parent training seems like a good idea, as well as creating some materials like print materials that we can share with parents and other family caregivers. So all of these activities will be bundled up with our resources, remember, and then that will generate these outcomes, we hope. The community of practice addresses at least 3 barriers to alternative guardianship agreements. The 2 to 4 trained youth ambassadors speak with peer groups at conferences, workshops, and high school events to promote alternatives to guardianship. And the community of practice informs family members about supported decision-making and other alternatives through multiple events and easy-to-read materials. You'll remember that we also have outputs, which are the things that will happen as a result of these activities. And so we hope that the council will, in the course of these activities, create legislation and/or rules that eliminate barriers to alternative guardianship arrangements. As we say, we don't know if it needs to be legislation. Plan for ongoing youth ambassador program, a plan to keep that going, a contract with GMSA to support some of that work, a video and/or story portrait of our youth ambassadors, 30+ parents who are trained about alternatives to guardianship, and 3 to 5 easy-to-read materials about guardianship in English and in other languages that are commonly spoken in Vermont. And that concludes the third objective in this goal area. All right, so now we're going to turn to the fourth objective in this goal area, and that has to do with peer support, peer-to-peer support, self-advocates to self-advocates. And in our next objective, we'll also be talking about family-to-family support. This objective reads, the DD Council will ensure that trained peers are available to support those who need help with their home and community-based services. That's what HCBS means, home and community-based services, and other supports. So the vision here, I want to expand on this a little bit, is that there comes a time when in Vermont, as in some states already, self-advocates, peers, are paid to be providing some formal support to fellow self-advocates, especially to support them through getting their service plans in place. So if you're going to be receiving home and community-based services, there's a kind of an approach called person-centered planning that is now the expectation of the Medicaid folks that fund home and community-based services. They say you must have a person-centered plan and have this person-centered process. And we think that one of the ways to ensure that is to have peers there, a peer there to support the self-advocate, the individual who's undergoing that particular planning meeting and focusing on their individual service agreement. So in order to get ready for that vision, that time when we hope there are paid peers, we are beginning a process of making sure that there's a pool of educated peer advocates that we can draw on to fill that role. So a new activity would be training self-advocates, providing advanced level training to at least 10 self-advocates who would be potential candidates for peer support jobs. Over this last summer, more than 40 self-advocates have been taking an introductory level training to person-centered planning. It's a wonderful class. I actually just attended a session of it about an hour ago. And the graduates of that class probably won't be all 40, but some percentage of that class we hope will go on to continue to receive instruction in person-centered planning and how to be peer support providers. And then we also hope that the supervisory structure will begin to evolve so that if there are paid peers, there's a way to ensure that they're receiving the ongoing guidance and professional development they'll need in order to do that role well. So with that, we hope to have an outcome that looks like this. At least 10, a very realistic and frankly modest goal, self-advocates have received advanced training in person-centered planning and peer mentoring. The second area of activity has to do with training parents in special education law and rules and in how to help advocate for other family members in the special education process. We've been doing that by supporting scholarships in a training program run by an organization called COPA, which stands for the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. COPA is a national organization with some very high quality training and an annual conference. And we have for the last 5 years supported, I want to say maybe not quite 30 parents to participate in at least one session of COPA training. And they report to us that they have found that civil rights approach to special education advocacy to be very helpful to them. And some of them have gone on for advanced training and reported to us that they are very interested in finding ways to use their new skills. The advanced training is a tough training to support other family members. So we hope by continuing to sustain these small investments, at least 20 parents, 20 additional parents will have received, the training is called SEAT, Special Education Advocacy Training. That stands for SEAT 1, which is the introductory training, or SEAT 2, which is the advanced training, through COPA. And that Vermont graduates begin to come together, and here I'm going to use that funny phrase again, a community of practice. It means a group that meets regularly because they share an interest in a particular approach to doing things. And they learn more about that approach, educate themselves, and talk about ways to promote that approach so that it is used more in a more widespread way. That's a community of practice. So with those two activities, a couple more activities. Forgot about this slide. There's going to be some additional activities. Information sharing is a big component of this. Okay, so this is actually hiding in a small little statement of activity. This is actually a very ambitious idea. Our council members on the program committee were adamant that we address the problem of not being able to find out in some kind of easy manner that is does not require one to to ask a designated agency for information, an ability to find out in an independent way what the heck is available for adult services. So in our current system, that information is generally given to you when you contact the agency that is potentially going to be providing services when your loved one becomes an adult. That information is sometimes piecemeal, it's sometimes incorrect, and it is subject to conflicts of interest since the agency has a vested interest in possibly getting you to sign up with them for services. I'm not saying they always act on that interest, but I'm just saying it is a structured in conflict of interest. So an idea to address that conflict of interest has been, well, hey, why isn't there just an independent website? And I have reached for the phrase independent and curated website. By curated, a fancy word that comes from the world of museums. A curator is somebody who decides what goes in a museum or what goes on a web page. So the idea would be that reliable information that has been carefully fact-checked would go onto that web page. So this idea of establishing an independent curated website with information about adult services. Short sentence, tall order. But the hope is that it will have the outcome that self-advocates and family members have access to a website with unbiased and complete information about adult, home, and community-based services. And then there is a second idea, and that has to do with family networking. And the idea is to establish 3 safe networking opportunities for parent caregivers of an adult with IDD. So parents who are supporting their adult son or daughter, whether that adult son or daughter lives with them or maybe lives with a home provider, those adults, because they're not all meeting each other in the same school district, no longer have a way to connect with other families in a similar situation. And because of privacy laws, agencies can't tell parents who the other parents are, or they're certainly not very excited about working through the privacy issues that might have to be sorted through to make that happen. But we're thinking that if there were an independent website, that is a place where people can, in safe, monitored chat rooms, for example, meet one another. There are ways through listservs, there are other electronic means, and then there's just a good old-fashioned hosting a get-together type of event. There are safe ways that families can meet other families and begin to get some of the family-to-family support that we know is so important. Most families tell us that what they know about services and supports they have mostly learned from other families. So it's a very important way of ensuring that people know what their options are. We hope that by facilitating that networking in, again, a safe way that respects privacy, family caregivers of adults connect with one another through the website and other channels to share information. And with that, we will move to the next slide, which has to do with some of the outputs or things that we think are going to be created by these activities. At least 10 trained self-advocates who are ready to be peer mentors. Advanced training curricula for peer mentors who are self-advocates. Preliminary guidelines and emerging leadership structure for peer mentors. At least 20 more family members who've taken a COPA course in special education law. An emerging community of practice for special education advocacy that is a coming together of the family members who have taken the COPA trainings. An independent curated website with information about adult programming. A board and policies for that website. Remember, I said it needed to be curated. That means it probably needs legible policies, and it probably needs an editorial board to oversee it. And then a safe online means of connecting with family caregivers for support and problem solving. This concludes the fourth objective in this goal area. And now we will move to number 5, which is a close cousin of number 4. And this has to do with family caregivers of adults. Remember, I said just a minute ago how there is this challenge that when your son or daughter becomes an adult, it becomes more difficult for you to connect with other parents or siblings who might be supporting somebody in a similar type of situation. So this objective reads, the DD Council will support the expansion and long-term sustainability of the oh, that is the wrong language. That is incorrect. Let me read the correct language. Did not realize there was a typo here. The DD Council will support and connect family caregivers of adults with developmental disabilities. I apologize for the typo. There are 3 areas of activity. One is to act as a convener, pulling together a work group of family caregivers, initially focused on this idea of a website, which we just discussed in the previous objective. Host some informational events, and then start to brand or name this group. This work group is kind of the very kernel of a seed that might grow into some kind of a network of parent to parents who are supporting an adult, or parent to sibling to parent. And the hope then is that that structure will also begin to include within it maybe a couple of subgroups or projects underneath it. One of them might be supporting the website. Another might have to do with a later objective that we're going to talk with you about, which has to do with entrepreneurship. So we hope that in combination, these very new activities that we haven't really fully fleshed out yet are going to have 2 outcomes. Over 2 years, a cohesive group of family caregivers is established with a shared interest in improving communication and quality assurance in adult services, and that work group has an emerging leadership structure. Now, remember, in our first video, I said there are some areas that are so new, the council needs to spend some time studying the problem and studying the solutions. So we also are suggesting that in this area, staff learn successful models for family support, especially ones that are related to family caregivers of adults. And the outcome of that would be that the staff are more knowledgeable about family support. Finally, we'll turn to the actual concrete things that result from these activities. The council will create a work group of interested parents of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and that group will have a structure. There will be 6 well-attended meetings per year that are valuable to the family caregivers who are there. So remember, we talked about informational type meetings. There will be a name recognition of the family caregiver work group. Remember, we talked about branding it. The editorial board for the website with adult services information has been formed. There will be 2 subcommittees or work groups under this umbrella of an adult, some kind of adult network of family caregivers for adults. And there'll be a written summary of the research that the council staff have undertaken. That one feels a little less formed because, as I said, it's an area where we still need to do some studying. So now I'm going to show you briefly this last somewhat confusing slide, which draws on some of those other labels that the Administration for Community Living likes to check off when we are talking about the work that councils do. So I'm going to notice that in this goal area, the last 5 objectives that we talked about, there are 2 areas of emphasis. Remember that there were 7 total, and they kind of covered all of the possible service areas. These all touch on formal and informal supports and on quality assurance and on making sure that services are the best they can be. The next question is, does this goal area check off any of the requirements under the Act? And indeed, it checks off 3 of them. Supporting self-advocacy was covered in Objective 1.2. Supporting peers to teach other peers was checked off in Objective 1.1 and also to some degree 1.2. And there was partnering with other DD network organizations, which happens through the leadership series. And may happen through other elements in this goal area, but we don't know about that yet. And then what kind of strategies will the council use? And I noticed that at least 6 of the 11 strategies are assumed to be part of the work in all these activities that we've just discussed. So there's outreach, there's providing technical assistance, such as GMSA supporting its local chapters. There is the elimination of barriers here specifically to alternatives to guardianship. There's demonstration of a new approach that again would be supported decision-making or other alternatives to guardianship. It would also be the idea of an independent website as a very new approach to options, to making options known to families and self-advocates. There's coordination with related councils. And there is supporting and educating communities, especially about issues like what is self-advocacy, and also about what do we mean by guardianship and what are the alternatives. So those are some of the things we'd be educating people about. All right, take a deep breath. We've only gotten through 1 of 4 goal areas and 5 of 14 objectives. And with that, we're going to conclude this section or module of our video presentation. Thank you.